Before we even speak of mistake or consequence, before we dare to utter the word karma, we must first understand the fundamental silence of the universe. It is in this silence that the truest laws operate, laws far more ancient and far more precise than any statute crafted by man. This is not a silence of absence, but a silence of perfect potential, a vast unseen field where every intention, emotion, and action sends out a vibrational signature. Nothing disappears into the void, nothing escapes registration. The universe is not watching with eyes, but listening with pure, energetic intelligence. It receives, records, and responds with mathematical exactness. We must learn to listen, not just with our ears, but with the awareness embedded in the deepest part of our soul, because it is this quiet inner knowing that understands the inescapable equations of creation. Take a moment now and simply breathe. Inhale the stillness. Let the breath settle deep within the center of your being. Exhale the noise of the world, the static of expectations, and the weight of misunderstandings. Feel for a moment the delicate but unmistakable vibration of your own consciousness. You, the soul who is hearing this, have been placed by intention, by alignment, by spiritual appointment, upon a path that is anything but ordinary. This path is often called the chosen path or the anointed path. But these are not poetic labels. They describe a frequency, a resonance, a spiritual assignment that you carry, whether you acknowledge it or not. The brighter your inner light, the more you attract friction from lower energies. This is not punishment, this is confirmation. Light creates shadows by its very existence, and powerful frequencies disturb anything that vibrates beneath them. So when misunderstanding appears, when jealousy stirs, when opposition rises seemingly without cause, understand this: you are not being reduced, you are being revealed. You know that feeling, don't you? That subtle tightening in the solar plexus, that inner alertness when someone decides, whether consciously or energetically, that your peace must be disturbed. People who misinterpret your kindness assume it is weakness. They view your silence as emptiness and your patience as vulnerability. They do not understand that these qualities are the behaviors of a soul governed by higher law. They cannot imagine that your refusal to retaliate is not fear, but sovereignty. This misinterpretation is the birthplace of their downfall. For the soul walking the chosen path is protected not by physical armor, but by energetic alignment. Every malicious word, every covert attack, every envious intention sent toward you instantly disrupts the universal field. Not because you're fragile, but because the energy directed at you contradicts the laws that govern your frequency. This is the law of emission and return. The cosmos is not moral, not emotional, and not vindictive. It is precise. It is a mirror polished by eternity itself. Whatever a person sends out, especially toward a vessel aligned with divine purpose, returns to them with flawless accuracy. Not because you ask for justice, but because reality itself demands balance. And this is where their error becomes monumental. They believe they are confronting you. In truth, they are challenging a spiritual law that cannot be bent, halted, or negotiated with. The moment they act against a chosen vessel, the mirror begins its work. The correction has already been set in motion. Now we turn to the psychological and spiritual mechanisms through which this rebalancing unfolds, one inevitable point at a time. Point one, the loss of inner clarity and discernment. The very first sign of the inevitable consequence, the initial tremor in their foundation, is always internal. manifesting as a deep erosion of the soul's capacity for clarity and discernment. This is not an external lightning strike, but a quiet corrosion of the inner landscape. When a soul intentionally directs malice, manipulation, or falsehood toward a chosen vessel, a person whose core intention is rooted in light and truth, they are energetically fouling their own internal wellspring. The darkness they project is not merely expended, it adheres to the projector, creating a dense vibrational sludge within their own energetic field. Imagine the human consciousness as a meticulously crafted lens designed to interpret the complex light of reality. This lens requires perfect, unblemished clarity to function properly, to make accurate decisions, and to discern true opportunities from clever deceptions. The act of malice, of focusing intent to harm, introduces distortion into this lens. Their inner vision, which may have served them well in the superficial, material world, perhaps making them adept at cunning, acquisition, or social maneuvering, begins to profoundly fail on the level of essential truth. They lose the ability to differentiate beneficial connections from predatory ones. They become blind to the subtle warning signs that once protected them. This internal obscuration is the beginning of the end of their strategic advantage. They start making critical errors in judgment, not because they are being externally punished by an angry deity, but because the vibrational integrity of their operating system is compromised. The energetic fog they created has now permanently stained the lens through which they perceive their own reality, their own potential, and their own risks. This lack of clarity forces them to miscalculate future moves with increasing frequency, leading them further and further away from sustainable success. They chase illusions, trust betrayers, and commit resources to endeavors that are guaranteed to fail. The universe does not strike them down, it simply ceases to illuminate their next step. They have, by their own choice of action, walked themselves into a dense, spiritual fog where every path looks identical, and the true exit remains permanently obscured. This self-inflicted blindness is the primary, quiet casualty of their mistake. Point 2, the recoil of trusted alliances. The second layer of consequence manifests in the realm of relationships and social architecture. The energy of conflict and manipulative intent is at its core a repellent frequency. It is a discordant sound in the cosmic symphony, and all harmoniously tuned instruments will instinctively seek to distance themselves from the noise. Those who have positioned themselves against your peace, those who participated in the campaigns of gossip or rejection, will discover a peculiar, isolating effect taking hold of their lives. They may not understand it at first because spiritual disconnection rarely announces itself with thunder. Instead, it begins quietly, like a slow leak in the foundation of their social existence. The universe begins the delicate, methodical process of removing the foundation of their external support system. People they relied upon for emotional ballast, for professional partnership, for comfort, or for strategic advancement will subtly, almost imperceptibly, begin to withdraw. The former friends who once entertained their bitterness now feel strangely heavy in their presence. The colleagues who once entertained their schemes now sense an inexplicable discomfort around them. Even the casual acquaintances who once gravitated toward them for light conversation now feel a gentle inner push to step away. This withdrawal is rarely dramatic. It is often explained away by material circumstances, a job transfer, a sudden shift in priorities, a slow fade of communication, or a developing lack of shared interest. But the underlying spiritual reality is that the energetic toxicity they generated by attacking the anointed path has saturated their personal sphere. High vibrational, balanced people simply cannot coexist in proximity to low vibrational, corrosive energy for long without compromising their own well-being. And so, without confrontation, without argument, without the need for divine spectacle, a separation begins. What once looked like a thriving social environment becomes a hollow shell that cannot sustain connection. The effect is one of spiritual insulation. The genuine souls in their life, the ones who offered true unconditional support, will be naturally repelled by the heavy, complicated energy of deceit and malicious intent. These souls will begin choosing peace over proximity, alignment over loyalty, and emotional clarity over obligation. They may not even consciously understand why the distance is necessary, but their intuition will guide them away from the contamination. Conversely, the only souls who remain in their orbit will often be those who operate on a similarly low parasitic frequency. The opportunists, the manipulators, the emotionally unstable, the jealous, the petty. These are the ones who feel comfortable in the fog of spiritual corrosion. And so, without ever realizing it, your adversaries are left with relationships built on shifting sand, relationships of convenience, codependency, or mutual opportunism, lacking the depth and loyalty required to weather any true storm. These alliances can mimic connection, but they cannot generate actual support. They can imitate friendship, but they cannot produce safety. When the karmic reckoning inevitably arrives, they are left isolated, unable to rely on the stable, loving support system they once possessed. They discover, often too late, that in sabotaging your peace, they simultaneously sabotaged the spiritual infrastructure that upheld their own lives. In this state, every challenge becomes heavier, every burden becomes sharper, and every consequence becomes more personal. They are forced to rely solely on the unstable, chaotic ground of their own internal energy, which is precisely what has been compromised in point one. The silence of their suddenly empty room is the sound of their mistake echoing back to them. It is the spiritual reverberation of their own choices returning home with perfect precision, reminding them that no attack on a chosen one ends where it begins. Its effects ripple outward, reshaping their entire relational world until nothing remains but truth. Point three, the diminution of unearned favor. To understand this consequence, we must first recognize that divine favor is an ethereal, non-material currency. It is a grace note from the universe that places one in the right place at the right time. It is that crucial, unexpected phone call, the unforeseen open door, the advantage that defied logic or effort. The anointed path often attracts this favor easily because the soul is in a state of flow and high alignment. Those who oppose this path are attempting to cut off or steal this flow. What they fail to realize is that divine favor is not a resource that can be interrupted by human manipulation. It cannot be siphoned, contaminated, or redirected through malice. Favor operates on frequency, not force. And when someone intentionally sets themselves against a chosen soul, they are essentially placing themselves in direct contradiction to the current that sustains blessing. They are choosing misalignment, and misalignment always has a cost. For the duration of their intentional opposition, those who dedicated energy to causing you distress will notice that their unearned favor begins to dissipate entirely. The small, seemingly insignificant strokes of luck, the perfect parking space, the delayed traffic light that prevented a greater inconvenience, the unexpected windfall, the charming opportunity, all begin to vanish. Opportunities they once took for granted, which smoothed their way through life, will either cease to appear or be diverted to another path entirely. This is not punishment. It is spiritual cause and effect. When someone willingly becomes a source of obstruction to a divinely guided individual, they unknowingly step outside the protective current of grace that once cushioned their own path. This is the principle of energetic recalibration. The reservoir of unearned grace that they might have benefited from is subtly and meticulously redirected. The universe is not engaging in pettiness. It is correcting a massive spiritual overdraft. Their interference created a deficit, and deficits must always be balanced. By intentionally casting negative energy, they have spiritually disqualified themselves from receiving the positive overflow that aids those walking in alignment. They find themselves having to work exponentially harder, exhausting themselves for results that were once easily achieved. Their once smooth outcomes become erratic and unpredictable. The ease they enjoyed evaporates, replaced by a grinding friction that touches nearly every corner of their day-to-day life. Their life begins to feel like trying to run through thick, dense water, while your life, the one they sought to disrupt, begins to flow with greater ease as the redirected favor finds its proper vessel. You move forward with quiet momentum, supported by alignment rather than strained effort. Meanwhile, their momentum slows, not with a dramatic collapse, but with a subtle, persistent drag that becomes impossible to ignore. This isn't a spectacle of loss. It is a slow, grinding deceleration of their momentum. It is the kind of spiritual correction that doesn't announce itself with thunder, but instead reveals itself through the everyday inconveniences, the stalled opportunities, and the missed chances that slowly accumulate into undeniable consequence. They begin to understand the immense spiritual cost of their choices only when simple daily tasks become inexplicably difficult and exhausting. They are forced to live in a state of pure, raw effort, deprived of the gentle winds of grace that once pushed their sails forward. They begin to wonder why everything feels heavier, slower, and more draining. But the answer is simple. They stepped out of alignment the moment they attempted to sabotage someone who was chosen, protected, and divinely guided. The absence of this subtle favor is the universe's quiet affirmation of the law of reciprocity. What you give, whether blessing or burden, must return. In opposing you, they opposed their own blessing. In trying to block your path, they blocked their own. And in seeking to dim your light, they only ensured that their own would flicker. Point 4, the shadow of inevitable boredom and emptiness. The fourth consequence is arguably the most profound spiritual consequence, for it strikes directly at the meaning and purpose of the human experience. It is not characterized by physical pain or financial destitution, but by the slow, suffocating realization of hollowness and emptiness. It targets the internal architecture of a person's identity, their motivations, their sense of direction, and the stories they tell themselves to justify the way they move through the world. Those who waged a malicious campaign against the anointed path do not understand, at least not consciously, that their actions required an enormous, unsustainable investment of psychic and emotional energy. Every whispered rumor, every calculated move, and every attempt to derail your progress demanded something from them. attention, imagination, emotional charge, and time. This investment becomes the scaffolding that supports their daily existence. The plotting, the gossip, the observation, the obsession with your perceived downfall, all of this becomes a high-octane, though ultimately toxic, fuel for their lives. It becomes the compelling narrative that gives their existence structure and focus. They awaken each day with a storyline to chase. You become their unofficial purpose, their shadow mission, the reason behind their emotional spikes and their restless curiosity. And because malice is addictive, they grow dependent on the stimulation it provides. But when the karmic process begins and their actions cease to have any meaningful impact on your peace or progress, as detailed in points 1 to 3, the obsession with your demise fades, not because they choose to release it, but because the universe gently yet firmly removes every possibility for their malicious agenda to succeed. Their influence dissolves, their attempts fall flat, their manipulations become ineffective. They cannot touch what God has shielded. And so the spiritual consequence emerges. They are left with the hollow echo of their own inner void. The passion, the fervor, and the singular focus they expended on their opposition were, in fact, a powerful distraction, a highly effective technique for avoiding the terrifying necessity of facing themselves. Malice gave them meaning. Hatred gave them rhythm. Monitoring your life gave them a sense of control they lacked within their own. When the distraction is forcibly removed, when they can no longer find relief in the thought of your ruin, they are suddenly confronted with an acute, deep, and unsettling boredom, a spiritual stillness that does not soothe, but suffocates. They lose the motivation that once drove them, because that motivation was never rooted in purpose. It was rooted in obsession, and an obsession is only satisfying when there is something to repeatedly feed it. When the universe blocks their access to you, when your elevation becomes untouchable, they are left starving for stimulation that no longer exists. The things they once coveted, possessions, status, superficial pleasures, fail to deliver satisfaction. Their victories feel flat. Their relationships feel empty. Their pleasures feel temporary and thin. They experience a profound lack of joy, a spiritual fatigue, and a pervasive sense that nothing they pursue truly satisfies the soul. The internal drought begins. They realize, slowly, painfully, that their entire sense of purpose was tied to a destructive, external, and ultimately temporary conflict. And this is the truth of their consequence. They made their greatest mistake not when they attacked you, but when they invested their entire soul into an agenda that guaranteed the spiritual impoverishment of their own lives. They traded their potential for inner peace for the fleeting, bitter satisfaction of malice. Their downfall is not what happens to them externally, but what they become internally. A person emptied of meaning once their chosen object of hatred is removed from their reach. Point 5, the precise reflection of their own intent. We now address the mechanism of precise energetic mirroring, the most classically understood element of karma. The universe is not satisfied with a generic consequence. It demands a perfect crystalline reflection of the original intent. The law of cause and effect ensures that the consequence is tailor-made to the action, becoming a direct, unavoidable tutorial in empathy. Karma does not operate with randomness or vague moral sentiment. It responds with surgical precision, returning an experience shaped from the very blueprint of the harm that was projected. This is why those who injure others often find themselves, later in life, unable to escape a situation that feels eerily familiar. because it is the energetic echo of what they once initiated. If they sought, through manipulation or falsehood, to cause you financial loss or professional instability, the energetic consequence will manifest as an unexpected, complex, and draining challenge to their own resources. This will often occur through unforeseen systemic failures, an audit, a legal complication, a betrayal by a partner, or a sudden downturn in a previously stable endeavor. These events do not arise out of spite from the cosmos, but as a perfect reflection of the vibration they released into the world. The fear they attempted to seed in you becomes the tremor that destabilizes the foundation beneath their own feet. The loss they experience will hold the exact energetic signature of the anxiety, insecurity, and vulnerability they tried to impose on you, not to punish them, but to force them into the very emotional terrain they once weaponized. If they attempted to stain your reputation with untruths, slander, or malicious gossip, their own integrity will face unforeseen, public, and embarrassing scrutiny. The truth they sought to bury about you will become the very mechanism through which their own deeply hidden flaws are brought to light. In this way, karma operates with a refined poetic symmetry. Their attempt to distort your image becomes the magnetic force that pulls their own distortions to the surface. The loss of face they endure is directly proportionate to the energy, time, and malice they invested into diminishing yours. They become the architect of their own exposure, not because the universe is cruel, but because the universe is impossibly fair. Karma is not a crude sledgehammer. It is an exquisitely personal spiritual surgical tool. It does not simply strike back. It reveals, dissects, and teaches. It is not a generic punishment, but a meticulous mirror reflecting the precise nature of the harm they wished upon you. This ensures they experience the exact emotional frequency of their intent, forcing them to learn the lesson from the receiving end. In that reversal, something profound occurs. They realize that they are not fighting you, but fighting their own reflection. The universe simply places them in front of a mirror, so clear, so unforgivingly accurate, that they can no longer deny the truth of their own vibration. This detailed, inevitable reflection is the silent, terrifying certainty of spiritual law. Every malicious thought, every covert intention, and every calculated act becomes a promissory note for future experience. Karma does not collect interest in anger, it collects interest in understanding. The lesson is always designed for elevation. The consequence is always crafted for awakening. And the reflection is always perfect, because the universe wastes nothing, not even the darkness someone tried to project onto you. Point 6, the spiritual pressure of regret. As the cumulative effects of points 1 through 5 take hold, the next layer of consequence is activated, the spiritual pressure of regret. This is the final internal reckoning, a deep, heavy comprehension that descends upon the soul. It does not arrive with thunder or spectacle, rather it settles slowly, like a dense fog that grows thicker with every passing hour. And though it is quiet, it is unrelenting, pressing inward from all sides, demanding acknowledgement of what has been done and what has been lost. This is not the dramatic, weeping remorse seen in theatrical narratives. It is not a loud confession or a sudden collapse. Instead, it is a sober, suffocating realization of irreversible loss. It is the kind of regret that matures slowly, becoming more textured the longer they sit with it. They begin to compute, piece by piece, the full spectrum of what they have forfeited by choosing conflict, enmity, and obstruction over peace, support, and collaboration. What once felt like power now reveals itself as a spiritual debt. The very energy they invested in trying to derail you was energy they needed for their own growth, but can never reclaim. And as this truth rises into full consciousness, something inside them sinks. They begin to see clearly what was always invisible to them before, that the spiritual energy they wasted on tearing you down was energy they could have used to elevate their own lives, heal their own wounds, or build their own future. They see how every moment spent plotting against you was a moment stolen from their own destiny. They recognize that each internal battle they initiated with you was in reality a battle against their own potential. This is the moment when regret begins to whisper, not in anger, but in brutal honesty. The pressure mounts when they start to witness, with painful clarity, the opportunity cost of their malice. They observe your continued quiet growth and stability, growth that did not require revenge, retaliation, or public vindication. Your peace becomes a mirror in which they see the disarray of their own choices. They contrast your steady elevation with their increasing internal chaos and external difficulty. They see how life has gently, but firmly, brought them back to the consequences they tried to outrun. And they realize, perhaps only in the deep silence of a sleepless night, that the time, emotional labor, and spiritual currency spent on making an enemy out of a chosen vessel far outweighed any perceived, temporary gain. They replay moments, examine decisions, and feel the weight of what could have been, what they could have built, who they could have become, where they could have grown, had they not squandered their essence on opposition. The mistake, they finally understand, was not just in the action, but in the misallocation of their most precious, non-renewable resource, their own life force. This heavy comprehension that they self-sabotage their own journey is the true, quiet agony of their mistake. It is not punishment. It is a revelation. It is the soul showing them, without distortion, the truth they refuse to face. And that truth is simple, yet devastating. They were the primary architect of their own distress. This regret is the mechanism through which the spirit begins to gently, slowly demand a higher, more truthful path. It is the internal alarm that signals the need for transformation, the spiritual recalibration that insists they stop waging war against what was never harming them. Though it is a powerful catalyst for eventual growth, the first stage of this awakening feels like a crushing, inescapable burden, the unmistakable gravity of realizing they were fighting the wrong battle all along. Point 7, the undeniable elevation of the anointed path. And finally, we arrive at the seventh and most powerful principle, the undeniable elevation of the anointed path. This is the ultimate spiritual consequence for the antagonist, as it is the definitive proof of their failure and the confirmation of the divine order. The law is clear. Every attack that was intended to break you, to diminish your frequency, or to shatter your peace has actually been transmuted and recycled by the universe. This negative energy did not stick to you. Instead, the pressure of the opposition served as the very furnace that forged your spiritual resilience, strengthened your discernment, and accelerated your bond to the divine flow. You emerge from the period of opposition not merely intact, but polished, refined, and significantly elevated. This is the paradox your enemies never foresaw, that the very harm they attempted to inflict became the raw material for your refinement. Every moment you were doubted, betrayed, ridiculed, or falsely accused was silently documented by the unseen realm, and every tear, every sigh, every prayer you whispered in the dark became currency in the spiritual economy, an investment that has now matured into undeniable favor. The final crushing consequence for those who made you their enemy is the stark, public, and undeniable proof of your continued accelerated success. As their world gently, methodically contracts, as their clarity fades and their alliances scatter, yours expands. Your peace remains unshaken, your goals are steadily achieved, and your spiritual health radiates outward, attracting genuine favor and benevolent opportunities. It is not revenge, it is realignment. It is not punishment. It is cosmic governance taking its rightful place. While they attempted to interfere with your destiny, the universe was quietly arranging circumstances so precise, so intentional, that your very ascent becomes its own kind of justice. Gracious, peaceful, yet unmistakably final. Your serenity, your resilience, and your radiant spiritual life become the final, unwavering evidence that their monumental mistake was challenging a force, a path, and a soul that was always destined to rise, not due to your own fighting effort, but due to the unbreakable, self-enforcing laws of the cosmos. They thought your stillness meant weakness. They thought your silence meant confusion. They thought your surrender meant defeat. But the spiritually awakened know a sacred truth. Elevation often announces itself through quietness long before it manifests as visible success. You did not retaliate because retaliation was beneath your nature. You did not collapse because collapse was beneath your design. You did not respond to the provocation because your energy was already being directed toward a higher assignment. What appeared to be endurance was actually transformation. What appeared to be survival was actually ascension. Their opposition did not hinder your journey. It merely provided the energetic contrast necessary for your light to shine brighter than ever before. Without their resistance, you would not have discovered the depth of your spiritual stamina. Without their hostility, you would not have learned the art of internal navigation. Without their attempts to belittle you, you would not have recognized your own divine expansion. And now, as the dust settles and the spiritual landscape reveals its final shape, it becomes evident to all: your rise was inevitable. Your elevation was written. Your success was sealed. And every force that attempted to obstruct you has, without realizing it, contributed to the brilliance of your unfolding destiny. This elevation is the definitive, peaceful conclusion to the drama they attempted to script, for it reveals what has always been true. The chosen ones do not just survive opposition, they ascend because of it. Dear soul, the profound lesson embedded within these 7 principles is not about vengeance or even the witnessing of the downfall of another. It is a lesson in absolute spiritual trust. You are not called to manage the consequences of those who choose opposition. You are not tasked with fighting their battles, nor are you responsible for their awakening. Your single, most profound task is to maintain the integrity of your own frequency. Breathe deeply now. Feel the solidity of your peace. Know, with a certainty that rests beneath the level of thought, that every ripple of malice, every thought of opposition, and every disruptive intent aimed in your direction is merely a vibration that must, by the most ancient of laws, return to the source that created it. Rest now in your divine anointing. Walk with deliberate, gentle grace in your path. The universe itself is handling the historical record of their mistake, with a precision that requires none of your emotional energy. All is balanced. All is well. Peace be with you.